The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a sound that echoed through the hall like thunder. Ambassador Chen Wei walked forward, his shoes clicking against the polished floor that stretched for what seemed like miles. Above him, the ceiling disappeared into darkness, and all around thousands of alien beings watched from their seats. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like they were made of living crystal. They all had one thing in common. They believed they were better than humans. Chen had made this walk many times before. 50 years ago, when humanity first met aliens, everything changed. The ships came from the sky, big and powerful and beautiful. The aliens said they came in peace. They said they wanted to help. They said humanity needed guidance to survive in a dangerous galaxy. Earth had no choice. The ships were too powerful, the weapons too advanced. Humanity signed the papers and accepted what the aliens called protective oversight. That was a fancy way of saying the aliens took control. They put their governors on Mars. They put their military bases on Luna. They divided human space into zones and told each zone what they could and could not do. When Earth protested, Council smiled their alien smiles and treated humans like children who did not understand what was good for them. For 50 years, humanity lived under their rule. Chen stopped at the center of the chamber, looked up at the crystal platform where the council leaders sat. The Zephalon Chancellor was speaking, her insect-like mouth clicking and clacking as her words came through the translator in his ear. She was talking about Earth's quantum research stations. The council had decided these stations were too dangerous for humans to operate. They wanted Earth to hand them over to what she called responsible stewards. Chen listened without expression. He had practiced this moment for years. The Chancellor kept talking, explaining all the reasons why humans could not be trusted with advanced technology. Her voice carried the tone of a teacher scolding a student. Behind her, other council members nodded their various heads in agreement. They had made their decision before Chen even entered the room. This meeting was just theater, just a formality so they could say they had given humanity a chance to cooperate. What the council did not know was that this meeting was theater for humanity too. Chen was not here to beg or negotiate. He was here to deliver a message. But not yet. The timing had to be perfect. The Chancellor finished her speech and looked down at Chen with eyes that had too many facets. She asked for Earth's response. Chen took a deep breath. This was the moment everything changed. Before he could speak, every screen in the chamber suddenly turned on. The council members jumped in surprise. The screens were not supposed to activate without permission. Security systems should have prevented any unauthorized broadcast. But the screens glowed with bright light, and on every single one, the same message appeared in every language the council used. We need to talk. All of humanity. Together, the message came from Earth itself, not from Chen's communicator, not from any human ship in council space. From Earth, broadcast through every quantum relay, every communication system, every hologram projector in the entire council network. The aliens had built their communication network to be impossible to hack. They had layers of security that should have stopped any intrusion. But the message was there, undeniable and impossible to ignore. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Council members shouted in 100 different languages. Security teams rushed to their stations, trying to trace the signal. Technicians worked frantically at their consoles, attempting to shut down the broadcast. Nothing worked. The message stayed on every screen, calm and patient and waiting. Chen stood in the center of the chaos and allowed himself a small smile. The council had spent 50 years studying humanity's 42 colony worlds. They had counted every ship, measured every weapon, cataloged every piece of technology that Earth officially possessed. They had filed reports that called humanity manageable primitives. They believed they knew everything about human civilization. They were wrong. The 42 colonies were just the ones humanity had allowed them to see. Those colonies were performances, stages where humans played the roles the council expected. Grateful subjects who needed guidance. Primitive species, learning from their betters. Workers who struggled with basic technology and needed alien supervision. It was all an act. While the council watched those 42 worlds, humanity had been very busy in the dark spaces between stars. Busy building colonies the Council never detected. Busy developing technology the Council never imagined. Busy creating a network that connected hundreds of human worlds through quantum signals that looked like background radiation to alien sensors. The Council had made a fatal mistake. They assumed that what they could see was all that existed. They assumed that humans who seemed to struggle with technology actually were struggling. They assumed that a species that reached space only 500 years ago could not possibly outsmart civilizations that had traveled the stars for 10,000 years. Chen had been part of the plan from the beginning. Every meeting he attended, every protest he filed, every time he played the role of frustrated ambassador representing a powerless Earth, he had been buying time. Time for the hidden colonies to grow. Time for the secret fleets to be built. Time for humanity to become strong enough that the Council could not simply crush them. The Chancellor finally restored order in the chamber. She turned her many-eyed gaze on Chen, and for the first time, he saw something other than arrogance in those eyes. He saw uncertainty, maybe even fear. She demanded to know what this meant. Chen straightened his jacket and prepared to deliver the speech he had practiced 1,000 times. But he kept it simple. Just as Earth had instructed, Earth requests a renegotiation of our relationship. You have 72 hours to respond. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The Council chamber, which had echoed with the confident voices of beings who believed they ruled the galaxy, fell completely silent. In that silence, Chen could hear the universe shifting. 50 years of careful planning, of playing weak while growing strong, of pretending to accept their place while building something the Council could not imagine. The 72 hours started now, and the Galactic Council was about to learn the difference between ruling humanity's scattered colonies and facing humanity as one united voice. They thought they knew humans. They were about to discover they knew nothing at all. Director Calthex stood in front of the emergency council session. His scales were changing colors in ways he could not control. For his species, color changes meant fear, and right now, every council member could see exactly how terrified he was. As head of council intelligence, it was his job to know everything that happened in council space. For 50 years, he had filed reports saying humanity was under control. He had been wrong. The hologram display behind him showed a map of human space. The 42 registered colonies glowed in blue. But now, scattered across the map, 67 new worlds appeared in red. 67 colonies that council censors had marked as uninhabited. Colonies that existed in systems the council had surveyed and dismissed as empty. Colonies that had been there for decades, growing and building and preparing. Completely invisible to the most advanced intelligence network in the galaxy. Calthex explained how it worked, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. The humans had developed a communication method using quantum entanglement, but not the way council species used it. They had hidden their signals inside what looked like natural background radiation. Every species in the council had scanned for it, and every species had dismissed it as meaningless noise, except humans. They had modified their own biology, putting special implants in their brains that let them perceive these hidden signals naturally. While the council congratulated itself on managing primitive humans, those primitives had built a secret civilization right under their noses, but it was worse than that. Much worse. Calthex pulled up personnel files next. Thousands of them. Humans who worked on council stations. Humans who served as technicians and engineers and scientists, and even janitors. The council had thought they were keeping these humans busy with simple jobs, giving them work that matched their limited abilities. Now Calthex had to explain that every single one of them was something else entirely. On Proxima Station, Vern Vex watched her world fall apart. She had ruled the station for 10 years, overseeing the human workers who maintained the equipment and cleaned the halls and did all the jobs that aliens considered beneath them. She had often thought the humans were clumsy. They dropped things. They made mistakes. They asked for help with technology that seemed simple. She had been patient with them, thinking she was being kind to a species that was trying their best. Now those same humans moved through the station with perfect precision. They sealed the spaceport doors using access codes they should not have known. They took control of the orbital defense platforms with expertise that shocked the alien technicians who were supposed to be teaching them. They did not rebel with violence. They simply stopped pretending to be what they were not. Vex finally understood. The clumsy technician who always needed help with the reactor controls was actually a special operations. A soldier who had spent a decade mapping every weakness in the station's defenses. The confused administrator who never seemed to understand counts of regulations was actually an intelligence officer who had been documenting everything. Every fumble, every mistake, every moment of seeming stupidity had been a carefully maintained lie. The humans were not taking over the station. They were revealing that they had always been in control. They just had not told anyone until now. Reports flooded in from across council space. The pattern repeated everywhere. Human workers suddenly displayed skills they had supposedly never possessed. Human scientists published papers on technologies they had supposedly never understood. Human soldiers appeared on worlds the council had not known they occupied. And everywhere, on every human face, there was the same expression. A smile. A knowing smile that said, "We fooled you, and you never suspected a thing." The council had believed humanity possessed maybe 300 ships total. Now, intelligence reported sightings of over 2,000 vessels, and they suspected many more existed in the hidden colonies. Ships that did not match any design in council databases, ships built with technologies that humans supposedly did not have. Ships that had been constructed in secret shipyards that should not exist. Emergency meetings filled the council chambers day and night. Representatives demanded answers. How had this happened? How had an entire civilization been built without their knowledge? The answer was simple, but humiliating. The council had assumed humans were primitive. They had seen what they expected to see. When a human struggled with technology, they assumed it was because humans were not smart enough to understand it. When a human asked basic questions, they assumed it was because humans lacked knowledge. Nobody had considered that the humans might be acting, that every weakness they displayed might be deliberate, that the species which had nuclear weapons 500 years after inventing writing might be better at deception than species which had been peaceful for millennia. Calthex finished his report with the most disturbing revelation of all. The council did not know where humanity's main fleets were located. They did not know how many weapons existed. They did not know what technologies had been developed in secret. For 50 years, the council had believed they held all the cards. Now they realized they did not even know what game they were playing. The Zephalon chancellor demanded options. Military advisors suggested immediate action. Diplomatic advisors suggested negotiation. Economic advisors suggested sanctions. But beneath every suggestion was a current of uncertainty that had never existed in the council before. For the first time in 3,000 years, they faced an opponent they did not understand. A new message came through on the communication systems. Ambassador Chin's face appeared on every screen. He looked calm and professional, exactly like he always had during 50 years of meetings. But now everyone wondered what else he was hiding behind that calm expression. His message was brief. Earth requests a renegotiation of our relationship. You have 72 hours to respond. The original ultimatum repeated, but this time with additional context. The council could choose to recognize humanity as equals, or they could choose to fight. But they should understand what fighting would mean. Humanity had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. They had studied every council military engagement. They had analyzed every tactic. They had identified every weakness, and they had done it all while pretending to be primitive and grateful for guidance. The 72 hours were counting down. Council members argued about what to do. Some wanted to negotiate immediately. Some wanted to show strength. Some wanted to pretend this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved peacefully. But they all knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. The Galactic Council had ruled for thousands of years because nobody had ever challenged them successfully. Species that tried to resist were crushed quickly and efficiently. The Council's power had never been seriously tested. Until now? Now they faced an enemy that had been preparing for decades, that had built strength in secret. That had turned the Council's own arrogance into a weapon against them. Calthex left the chamber and returned to his office. He pulled up the files on humanity again, reading through 50 years of reports. All the signs had been there. Humans who learned too quickly. Colonies that consumed more resources than their populations should need. Communication patterns that did not quite make sense. His analysts had noted these things but dismissed them as statistical anomalies. He had failed at his job. The entire council had failed. They had been so certain of their superiority that they never looked closely at the species they controlled. Now humanity had revealed itself, and the galaxy would never be the same. The countdown continued. 68 hours remaining. Admiral Vexter was a legend among the council military. His species, the Krynith, had evolved from pack hunters, and they brought that hunting instinct to warfare. He had commanded fleets for 200 years and never lost a battle. When the Belter Rebellion threatened council stability 40 years ago, Vexter crushed it in 3 weeks without losing a single ship. He was the being the council called when they needed someone reminded of their place in the galactic order. Now he stood in the military command center, studying the holographic display of human space. The council had given him a simple mission: show humanity that their little trick with hidden colonies meant nothing against real military power. Jump battle groups to 60 of their secret colonies simultaneously. Demand immediate surrender. Remind these upstart primates why the council had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Vexter felt confident. His fleet consisted of 600 warships, each one a masterpiece of council engineering. They had shields that could withstand nuclear explosions. They had weapons that could crack planets. They had sensors that could track a single ship across 3 star systems. The humans had hidden themselves well, but hiding was over. Now came the part where superior technology and military discipline defeated clever tricks. The operation launched with perfect precision. 60 battle groups materialized above 60 human colonies at exactly the same moment. Fleet commanders opened communication channels, ready to deliver the surrender demands. Then they saw what was waiting for them. Nothing. The colonies were there. The cities were there, glowing with lights and power, but there were no humans. Not in the streets, not in the buildings, not anywhere sensors could detect. Billions of people had simply vanished. Vexter stared at his display in confusion. It was impossible. You could not evacuate billions of people without leaving traces. Ships required time to load passengers. Cities could not be emptied in the hours since the ultimatum was delivered. Yet the sensors showed no life signs, no heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions that indicated human presence. It was as if the entire population had never existed before he could issue new orders. His sensors registered something emerging from subspace. Ships. Human ships. But not the clumsy freighters and patrol boats that Council intelligence had cataloged. These vessels were something completely different. Their hulls seemed to absorb sensor scans instead of reflecting them. Their engines produced no signature that matched any known drive system, and there were hundreds of them, peering from nowhere like predators that had been waiting in ambush. The human ships did not make demands. They did not issue warnings. They simply opened fire. But these weapons were like nothing Vexter had encountered. His shields, designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, did nothing. The human weapons passed through them like they were not there. His ship's engines shut down, not destroyed, but disabled with surgical precision. Across 60 star systems, the pattern repeated. Council warships dead in space, their crews unharmed, but their vessels completely helpless. The Battle of Kepler's Crown was over in 7 minutes. Vexter's flagship never fired a single shot. His weapons officer reported that targeting systems could not lock on to the human vessels. His defensive coordinator reported that shields were useless against weapons that bypassed them entirely. His engineering team reported that the human weapons were somehow targeting the quantum foam that allowed faster-than-light travel. A technology that should not exist because it required understanding physics at a level the Council believed only they possessed. Vexter had spent 200 years studying military history. He knew every great battle, every brilliant strategy, every technique that had ever won wars, and he realized with growing horror that none of it mattered. The humans were not fighting the same kind of war the Council understood. They had studied council tactics and found them predictable. They had analyzed council technology and discovered its weaknesses. They had watched the council win battles for 50 years and learned exactly how to defeat them. Reports came in from the other 59 battle groups. Every single one had been disabled in minutes. No council ships destroyed, no crews killed, but every vessel rendered completely helpless. The humans were sending a message, and that message was clear. We can destroy you whenever we want. We choose not to. Because we are not like you. From the disabled ships, human faces appeared on communication screens. Officers wearing uniforms that looked professional and military and nothing like the simple work clothes the council was used to seeing humans wear. They delivered the same statement to every council commander. We do not want war. We want respect. You have 48 hours remaining to respond to Earth's proposal. We suggest you use that time wisely. The communication channels fell silent. Vexter sat in his command chair, a legendary admiral who had just watched his entire career become meaningless. His ships were intact. His crews were safe, but his reputation was destroyed. The council had sent their best to remind humanity of their place, and humanity had responded by teaching the council a lesson instead, in the council chambers. Emergency sessions continued without pause. The military advisors, who had been so confident now, sat in silence. The display screens showed the disabled fleet's 600 warships drifting helplessly in space. Every species in the council was asking the same question. How did humanity develop such weapons? How did they build such ships? How did they become so powerful, while pretending to be weak? The Zephalon Chancellor demanded answers from the military high command. They had no answers to give. Everything they thought they knew about human capabilities was wrong. The intelligence reports were wrong. The technology assessments were wrong. The military evaluations were wrong. 50 years of data, all of it useless, because it was based on the assumption that humans were showing their true abilities. Some council members argued that this was just a temporary setback. Humanity had surprised them, but the council had resources across thousands of worlds. They could build new fleets, develop counter-weapons, overwhelm humanity with sheer numbers. Other council members pointed out the obvious problem with that plan. If humanity could hide hundreds of colonies and thousands of ships, what else were they hiding? How much of their true military capability had they revealed? Maybe these weapons were just the ones they wanted the council to see. One of the younger council members, a being from a species that had joined only 1,000 years ago, asked a question that made everyone uncomfortable. What if humanity is better at war than we are? The older members rejected this immediately. The council had fought and won countless conflicts. They had maintained peace across the galaxy for millennia. One species with clever tricks could not possibly be superior to the combined wisdom of hundreds of advanced civilizations. But the evidence floated in space, above 60 human worlds, 600 disabled warships, crews unharmed, vessels intact, but power gone. The humans had defeated the council's military without killing anyone. That level of precision, that level of control, required capabilities the council did not possess. It required understanding your enemy so completely that you could dismantle their weapons without destroying them. It required confidence that came from knowing you were completely in control. A new message arrived from Ambassador Chen. It included video footage from the battles, recorded from human ships. The footage showed council vessels from angles that should have been impossible. The humans had been tracking the fleet movements since before the battle groups even jumped to the colonies. They had known where every ship would appear. They had prepared ambushes at every location. The entire operation had been predicted and countered before it even began. Chen's voice accompanied the footage. You sent your best admiral and your finest ships to teach us a lesson. We appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate what we learned during 50 years of careful observation. Your tactics are very impressive against enemies who fight the same way you do. We do not fight the same way you do. You have 48 hours remaining. Please, choose wisely. Vexler watched the same footage in his disabled flagship, waiting for human ships to either tow them home or finish what they started. Neither happened. The human vessels simply left, disappearing back into whatever hiding places they came from. leaving the council ships floating helplessly, crews safe, but egos shattered. A reminder that mercy could be more devastating than violence, the clock continued counting down. 44 hours remaining until Earth's deadline. And the Galactic Council had no idea what to do next. The council chambers had never been so quiet. Ambassador Chen Wei sat across from the full assembly, but now his chair was at the same level as theirs, not below looking up. The Zephalon Chancellor had agreed to this meeting format, and that small change in position told everyone that the power dynamic had shifted. The beings who had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years were now negotiating with a species they had considered primitives just days ago. The Chancellor spoke first, her voice lacking the confident arrogance that had colored all previous meetings. She asked the question that every council member needed answered. How did you hide all of this from us? How did you build a secret civilization while we watched? How did you develop weapons that bypass our shields? How did you defeat our military so completely? Chen took a moment before responding. He wanted them to feel the weight of what came next. When he spoke, his words were simple and direct. You were not looking. You saw what you expected to see. Primitive humans, lucky to have reached space at all, grateful for your guidance. You counted our ships and measured our colonies. But you never asked what we were doing in the places where your sensors do not reach. You cataloged our registered technology, but assumed that was all we had. You forgot the most important rule of intelligence gathering. Never assume your enemy is stupid, especially when they want you to think they are. The explanation came in layers, each one more uncomfortable for the council to hear. Earth had spent 50 years studying council law, finding every loophole, exploiting every assumption. The quantum research stations the council wanted to shut down. Those were decoys obvious enough to attract attention, while the real research happened on mobile platforms that never stayed in one place long enough to be detected. Those platforms moved through deep space, doing their work in the darkness between stars, where council sensors were blind. The refugees who fled Earth's supposedly restrictive government? They were colonists, spreading to hidden worlds with full government support, building the infrastructure of a nation the council never knew existed. Every ship that left Earth officially went to one of the 42 registered colonies. What the council did not track were the ships that left those colonies heading to places that were not on any map. Over 50 years, thousands of ships made that journey, carrying millions of people and mountains of equipment to worlds the council had dismissed as uninhabitable or uninteresting. Chen explained how the communication network functioned. Humans had studied the background radiation that filled space, the quantum fluctuations that every species detected but considered meaningless noise. Human scientists found patterns in that noise, mathematical structures that could carry information. They developed neural implants that let human brains perceive these patterns directly, turning every human into a living receiver for a communication network that was invisible to everyone else. While the council used their quantum relays, which were fast but detectable, humans whispered to each other through the very fabric of space itself. Every human who worked for the council had been part of the intelligence operation. The technician who seemed to struggle with basic repairs was actually studying the reactor designs, looking for weaknesses. The administrator who needed help understanding regulations was actually documenting how council governance worked, finding the cracks in the system. The scientist who asked simple questions was actually testing how much the aliens would reveal about their technology. For 50 years, thousands of humans played these roles perfectly, never breaking character, always maintaining the illusion that they were doing their best to understand concepts that were just slightly beyond their reach. The weapons that disabled the council fleets were based on technology that humans had theorized about for 100 years, but never had reason to build until the aliens arrived. The council used shields that stopped energy and matter, technologies that were thousands of years old and extremely well understood, but they had never encountered weapons that targeted the quantum foam itself. The underlying structure of reality that made faster-than-light travel possible. Humans developed these weapons not because they were smarter than council scientists, but because they approached the problem differently. They asked, what if we do not try to punch through the shields? What if we go around them entirely? The Chancellor interrupted with a question that carried fear beneath its diplomatic phrasing. How much of your true military capability did you reveal? Chen smiled before answering. That is an excellent question. I think it is better if you do not know the answer. What matters is that we revealed enough to demonstrate we are not weak. Whether we have more weapons, more ships, more colonies, more technologies beyond what you have seen, I will leave that to your imagination. I will say this, though. Everything you witnessed was designed to disable, not destroy. We wanted to prove we could defeat your military without killing anyone. That should tell you something about both our capabilities and our intentions. The discussion shifted to philosophy. And this was where Chen delivered the deepest wound to Council pride. The Chancellor had built her entire speech about protective oversight on a foundation of good intentions. The Council genuinely believed they were helping younger species, protecting them from dangers they could not understand, guiding them toward a better future. Chen let them explain this philosophy fully before he responded. His response was devastating in its simplicity. You never asked if we wanted your protection. You never considered that we might have our own path, our own values, our own destiny. You saw us as children needing guidance, never as equals deserving respect. You assumed that, because you were older and more advanced, you had the right to make decisions for us. But age does not grant wisdom automatically, and advancement in technology does not mean advancement in ethics. You ruled us for 50 years. You never once asked us if we consented to being ruled. The council chamber remained silent. Some members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at Chen with expressions that ranged from anger to shame to confusion. The Zephyllon Chancellor, who had opened this conversation with questions about military capabilities, now faced a much more difficult challenge. Chen was not just demanding political change. He was questioning the entire philosophical foundation that the Council had built over thousands of years. Chen continued, his voice steady and calm. You believed you were helping us. I understand that. Many of you probably have nothing but good intentions. But here is what you do not understand. Being controlled by someone with good intentions is still being controlled. Being told what to do for your own good is still being told what to do. You took away our freedom to choose our own path, and you did it while believing you were doing us a favor. That makes it worse, not better. At least a conqueror admits they are taking your freedom. You took hours while calling it protection. The vote was called 3 hours later. The proposal was simple. Recognize humanity as a sovereign power with full rights and no oversight, or reject the proposal and face the consequences. The Council had never been divided on any vote in recorded history. They operated by consensus, with disagreements resolved through diplomatic discussion long before official votes happened. This time, the chamber split almost evenly. Species that had benefited from the old order voted to reject. Species that had chafed under council control for centuries voted to accept. Species that were uncertain about everything abstained. The final count was close enough that it required a second vote. During the break, council members argued in small groups. Some pointed out that accepting humanity's demands would fundamentally change the galactic order. Others pointed out that rejecting the demands would mean war with an enemy that had proven terrifyingly competent. Still others suggested compromise positions, ways to give humans some of what they wanted while maintaining council authority. Chen watched the debates with patient eyes. He had expected division. Humanity had planned for this moment, gaming out dozens of scenarios for how the vote might go. They had prepared responses for every outcome. If the Council voted to accept humanity as equals, there were diplomatic protocols ready to implement. If the Council voted to fight, there were military operations ready to launch. If the Council tried to delay or find middle ground, there were pressure tactics ready to apply. The second vote ended with a narrow majority in favor of recognition. Not because most Council members wanted to accept humans as equals, but because enough of them feared what war would cost. The Zephyllon Chancellor announced the result with a voice that trembled slightly. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had admitted that their way was not the only way, that their wisdom was not absolute, that younger species deserved the same rights they claimed for themselves. Chen stood and bowed respectfully to the assembly. He thanked them for their courage in choosing a peaceful path forward. But everyone in the chamber understood the real message beneath the diplomatic language. Humanity had won. Not through violence, not through destruction, but through superior planning, better intelligence, and the patience to play a long game that lasted 50 years. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the vote, the Treaty of Terra was signed aboard a massive space station in Earth's orbit. The station had been built specifically for this occasion, neutral ground where representatives from every council species and every human world could gather. Ships from hundreds of species filled the space around Earth, their hulls gleaming in the light of humanity's sun. But these ships did not come as conquerors or rulers. They came as guests, invited to witness the beginning of a new era. The treaty document was huge, covering thousands of pages of legal language that defined exactly what sovereignty meant. It recognized humanity not as a council protectorate, but as an independent power with voting rights, territorial integrity, and the freedom to develop technology and culture without oversight. But the document went further than just establishing human independence. It created something revolutionary, a principle that no species could claim authority over another without consent. It was a rule that applied to everyone, not just humanity. Ambassador Chen Wei signed the treaty first. Using a pen that had been made from metal taken from humanity's first spacecraft, the symbolism was deliberate. Humans had gone from primitive rockets to galactic power in 500 years, and they wanted everyone to remember how fast things could change. After Chen signed, representatives from each council species added their marks, symbols, or biometric signatures. Some signed eagerly, seeing opportunity in the new order. Others signed reluctantly, knowing they had no choice but accepting the inevitable. But humanity made a choice that surprised the galaxy. Instead of demanding territory or reparations or apologies for 50 years of control, Earth's diplomats pushed for something more radical. They wanted the council itself to change, not to be destroyed, but to be reformed. To become what its name suggested, an actual council where equals met to discuss common problems. Rather than a hierarchy, where the old ruled the young and called it protection, the reform movement started immediately. Species that had lived under council oversight for centuries suddenly found human lawyers arguing their cases. The Belters, who had been crushed by Admiral Vexther 40 years ago, brought their grievances before the new council, with human advocates standing beside them. The arguments were fierce and detailed, documenting exactly how the council had violated the sovereignty of a people who only wanted to mine asteroids in peace. The old council had called it suppressing rebellion. The humans called it crushing independence. The difference in language mattered. Human engineers began sharing technologies that the council had restricted for thousands of years. Faster communication systems, more efficient power generation, agricultural techniques that could turn marginal worlds into productive colonies. The council had always claimed these technologies were too dangerous for younger species, but humans demonstrated them safely on world after world. It became clear that the restrictions had never been about danger. They had been about control. By limiting what technology species could access, the council maintained their position at the top of the hierarchy. Human philosophers, us, challenged the assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. They asked uncomfortable questions in universities and forums and diplomatic meetings. Who decides what is best for a species? Who grants some beings the right to rule others? Is age the same as wisdom? Is technological advancement the same as moral advancement? The discussions spread across the galaxy, and for the first time in thousands of years, younger species found their voices being heard and respected. Not everyone was happy with the changes. The Krynith Empire, humiliated by their military defeat, withdrew from council space entirely. Admiral Vexther resigned in disgrace, unable to face the shame of his defeat. The Krynith retreated to their core worlds and sealed their borders, refusing all contact with the new galactic order. They issued a statement calling humanity dangerous revolutionaries who had destroyed the stability that protected everyone. Some species agreed with them, Seeing the changes as dangerous chaos rather than necessary reform, several species that had benefited from the old system found themselves suddenly accountable for their actions. The Zephyllon had run the Council's economic systems for 2,000 years, and their administration had been marked by corruption that everyone knew about but nobody mentioned. Human auditors came in with permission from reformed council authorities and documented exactly where resources had gone. The numbers were shocking. Trillions in wealth redirected to Zephyllon accounts. Technologies sold to favored species at discounts while others paid premium prices. Contracts awarded to companies owned by council members. The Zephyllon Chancellor resigned before she could be formally charged with anything, placed by a reform faction that promised transparency. Ambassador Chenwei returned to Earth after the signing ceremony, but he did not stay long. The new galactic order needed experienced diplomats who understood both human and alien perspectives. He spent his time traveling between worlds, mediating disputes, teaching younger diplomats the skills they would need to navigate the changed galaxy. He was 65 years old now, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that had not been there when he first walked into the council chamber 50 years ago. He had spent most of his adult life maintaining the greatest deception in human history. And now he spent his remaining years building something honest on Earth. People looked up at a sky that was different now. Ships from dozens of species came and went from orbital stations, but they came as partners rather than rulers. Trade ships brought goods from across the galaxy. Science vessels shared research. Diplomatic shuttles carried representatives who came to learn from humanity's experience. Earth had become what it had always wanted to be. Not isolated, not controlled, but free to engage with the galaxy on its own terms. The hidden colonies began revealing themselves one by one. Each revelation brought new shock to the species that thought they knew the limits of human space. Worlds that had been marked uninhabitable on council maps turned out to have thriving cities. Systems that were supposed to be empty had orbital stations and shipyards. The true scope of human civilization became clear over months of revelation. Over 200 worlds, billions of people, an economy that rivaled the largest council members. All of it built in secret, while the galaxy looked the other way. The lights stayed on in those hidden colonies. But now they stayed on not because they were secret, but because they were home. The colonies that had spent decades pretending not to exist could finally acknowledge their presence openly. Children who had grown up knowing they had to hide their homes from the outside galaxy could now tell anyone who asked where they came from. The weight of maintaining the secret, carried by millions of people for decades, finally lifted in the dark between stars. On the mobile research platforms that had developed humanity's secret technologies, scientists continued their work. But now, they published their findings, sharing discoveries with researchers from other species. The collaboration produced breakthroughs that neither humans nor aliens could have achieved alone. It turned out that combining different perspectives and different ways of thinking led to solutions that no single species would have found. The galaxy had been missing out on this synergy for thousands of years because the Council had kept everyone separated into neat hierarchies. Admiral Vexler, stripped of his rank and reputation, watched the changes from his home world. He had spent 200 years believing the Council's way was the only way to maintain galactic peace. Now he saw species cooperating without being forced, sharing without being managed, growing without being controlled. He did not know if he had been wrong about everything or if humanity had just been lucky. But he knew that his way of thinking, the way that had dominated Council military doctrine for millennia, had become obsolete in 7 minutes of combat. The galaxy had moved past him, and he had no place in the new order. The Zephyllon Chancellor, before she resigned, asked Chen one final question in private. She wanted to know if humanity had planned everything from the moment first contact happened. Chen thought about his answer carefully before responding. "No," he said. "In the beginning, we were genuinely frightened and unsure. But we learned quickly that you saw us as children, not equals. Once we understood that, we had to choose between accepting your control or preparing to break free someday. We chose freedom, and then we spent 50 years building the capability to take it. You taught us that we could not trust you to respect our sovereignty voluntarily. So we made ourselves impossible to control. The former chancellor asked if Chen felt guilty about the deception, about all the lies told over 50 years. Chen considered the question honestly. Every human who maintained the act had wrestled with that same question. Playing dumb, pretending to be weak, watching aliens look down on them with condescension. It had been humiliating at times, frustrating at times, enraging at times, but necessary, because the alternative was to live under someone else's control forever, to let another species make decisions about humanity's future, to accept that humans would never be trusted to guide their own destiny. "No," Chen said finally, "I do not feel guilty. You took our freedom without asking. We took it back. The method we used was necessary because you gave us no alternative. If you had treated us as equals from the beginning, none of this would have been needed. The guilt belongs to those who believed they had the right to rule others without consent." Years passed. The galaxy adapted to the new order. New conflicts arose because freedom meant the freedom to disagree, to compete, to sometimes come into conflict. But the conflicts were resolved through negotiation between equals rather than decrees from above. The council still existed, but it looked different now. More voices, more perspectives, more arguments, but also more genuine cooperation. Species that had never been allowed to speak now had platforms to share their views. Technologies that had been restricted now spread freely. The galaxy became messier, louder, more chaotic. It also became more innovative, more diverse. More alive, Ambassador Chen Wei died at the age of 90. Surrounded by family on Earth, his funeral was attended by representatives from 40 species, many of whom had fought against everything he worked for but respected what he accomplished. The eulogy was delivered by a young human diplomat who had learned everything she knew from Chen. She spoke about his patience, his vision, his willingness to play a role for decades to achieve something that mattered. She ended with words that became famous across the galaxy. "They thought we were children playing with fire. They never considered we might be the fire itself." Ambassador Chen taught us that power comes not from ruling others, but from being impossible to rule. Earth spoke, and the galaxy listened. Now it is our responsibility to make sure what we've built survives and grows. Freedom is not something you achieve once and forget. It is something you maintain through constant effort and vigilance. Let us never forget what was sacrificed to gain it. The galaxy had changed because humanity refused to accept someone else's definition of what they could become. The Galactic Council learned that ruling others required their consent, and consent could never be assumed or taken for granted. The younger species learned that age and advancement did not automatically grant wisdom or authority. And humanity learned that sometimes the longest path was the smartest path, that patience could be more powerful than force, and that the best way to win was to convince everyone you had already lost in the dark between stars. In the colonies that were no longer hidden, in the ships that no longer pretended to be primitive, humanity continued building their future, a future they chose for themselves, a future where they answered to no one but themselves. A future earned through 50 years of deception, 7 minutes of combat, and the courage to demand what should have been given freely from the start: respect.